Coming up on the next episode of Appalachia's Deadliest. No lawman could stop them. Prepare yourself for two of the baddest outlaws in American history. This is the true story of the Wright and Templeton gang. Jim Wright and John Templeton were the type of men you didn't want to cross, especially when it came to their own family. Because I'll tell you this right now, it would quickly become an eye for an eye type justice in the most brutal fashion possible. Buckle up for this incredible true story. The late 1800s produced some of the most legendary outlaws in American history. It was a time when a man could commit a crime, hop on a train, and easily reinvent himself thousands of miles away in just a few short days. And over the past 100 years, Hollywood has immortalized a select few of these renegades. Men like Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, and Doc Holliday caused an uproar during the westward expansion of the United States, creating sensational newspaper headlines. And in many ways, these bandits of the Wild West became the face of the outlaw spirit and rebellion in America. At the same time, back in the East, the aftermath of the Uncivil War had left a large surplus of weapons and men trained in guerrilla warfare. And for these men, the war didn't just suddenly end when General Lee surrendered. Folks couldn't simply just go back to the way life was prior to the conflict, especially when you looked out your front door with hate at your neighbor who had fought for one side of the war and you for the other. Bitter feuds were common, and old scores still needed to be settled, and they were, by some of the most ruthless men in American history. I've featured many of these desperados on Appalachia's Deadliest. Men like Devil Jim Turner, Captain Champ Ferguson, and Bad Tom Smith. Any single one of these men would have made Billy the Kid lock his door and peep out his window in awe at the sheer brutality of these mountaineers. That's right, Appalachia produced men just as hard and unforgiving as the towering granite mountains that walled it in from the rest of the civilized world. So you see, Jim Wright's childhood was filled with the horrors of a nation torn apart at its seams. And although his family had managed to stay out of the conflict, just 3 years into the war between the states, the war came knocking at their door. Paul, wake up! They got us surrounded!" Young Jim cried out as he ran into his parents' bedroom. The mountain man sprang from his bed and peeped through the window. There were at least 7 men carrying torches and armed with rifles. Just then his wife spoke up.
"Please, Samuel, don't open that door. I'll tell them you're not here."
"No, we can't chance it. They'll burn the whole place down with you and the boy inside. I'll go out and try to reason with them. We've stayed out of the war. We've done no wrong." Having to choose between his family's life and his own, Samuel Wright exited his cabin, unarmed, with his hands in the air, to face the Confederate vigilantes waiting outside. But no sooner than he stepped out of the door, a voice called out, "On your knees, you Yankee dog!" And then he took the butt of his rifle and cracked Mr. Wright across the head, forcing him to the ground. Inside the cabin, 13-year-old Jim Wright peered through the cracks in the log walls and watched as the men surrounded his father. The boy wanted to run outside. He wanted to scream, but his legs had turned to stone. And there he watched as his father looked back towards the cabin, right at him through that crack in the wall. One last look, and then came the sound of a shotgun. Everything went red. His father fell forward as one of the men kicked his lifeless body. And just like that, they rode off into the darkness. And so it was. Like so many ruthless men who came before him, the seeds of violence were planted in Jim Wright during a turbulent childhood. And something inside of him snapped, and he vowed that one day he would unleash hell upon the men who killed his father. That's right. From that day on, Jim Wright was destined for the life of an outlaw, fueled by revenge, bloodshed, and defiance of authority, and he would leave a trail of violence that spanned decades. Now, the events surrounding the life of Jim Wright are centered around Hancock and Hawkins counties, a vast mountain wilderness that is located on the Tennessee-Virginia state line and is just a stone's throw from Kentucky. In fact, if a man set out walking within 10 miles, he could leave Tennessee, cross through Virginia, and be standing in Kentucky. And during Jim's life, he would frequently use this to his advantage to avoid the law by slipping into another state. As a man, Jim Wright was known as a hot-tempered, fiercely loyal to his family, and prone to violence at the drop of a hat. It was said that he kept a small Bible in one pocket at all times and could quote scripture for hours. The only thing he loved as much as that Bible was moonshine, and the unlikely combination was as volatile as a powder keg. In the years following the Civil War, Jim was rumored to have killed 7 men, including 5 men in Kentucky, another fellow while he was hiding out in Texas, and a man named Dr. Patrick in Virginia. And although he was frequently indicted for violence, he had never been convicted. However, during the 1880s and 1890s, a chain of events would cement his status as one of the most legendary outlaws in American history. It all started on a cold winter day in February 1891 in an area near Newman's Ridge known as Panther Creek. Jim was among a group of men working at a local sawmill. As usual, he had a belly full of white whiskey and got into a heated argument over the proper meaning of a Bible verse with another fella named Joseph Owens. One thing led to another, and before you knew it, Joseph hit Jim with a freshly cut piece of poplar lumber, knocking him senseless. Well, just a few short days later, the 2 men would cross paths again, this time down at a general store. Jim promptly confronted the man and asked him to step outside due to some unfinished business between the two. However, they never made it to the door before fists began flying and both men pulled their sidearms and opened fire inside of the store. Jim sent a ball of hot lead into his adversary's stomach, killing him dead. Now, this murder was different from all the others because for the first time, Wright had killed a man on his home turf and was now a wanted man in Tennessee. But catching this outlaw would prove to be difficult. You see, Jim's family was loyal and helped him hide out from the law for months. All told, he avoided capture for the next 18 months before he was finally arrested in Missouri and placed on a train with 2 armed guards and sent back to Tennessee to stand trial. However, as the locomotive was crossing a bridge over a river, Jim suddenly sprang to his feet and jumped out the window of the moving train, falling nearly 50 feet to the water below and escaping. He was on the run for another good month before he was recaptured again, shackled in chains, and sent straight to jail in Sneedville, Tennessee to await trial. That set of leg chains certainly slowed Jim down, and by all appearances, he was certainly at the end of his criminal career. But after a month or so of discussing the virtues of the Old Testament every night with the jailer, the two had become good friends. The jailer concluded that Jim wasn't a threat, so he removed those leg chains from his new friend. And wouldn't you know it, By the next morning, Slippery Jim Wright had escaped again.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 4 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
Jim would spend the next few months hiding out at his daughter's house, but the law was hot on his heels. And by March of 1892, the sheriff and a posse of men had located his hideout and attempted to arrest him. Now, Jim's daughter was married to a man named Aaron Templeton, and he was a close ally of Jim's. And as soon as Aaron saw the lawman on his property, he stepped out his front door and opened fire. Within seconds, a gun battle erupted from all sides. While Jim jumped from his bed and climbed out of a second-story window with nothing but his shirt and his gun belt on. Barefooted, he made a mad dash for the woods as bullets zipped by his head. In the chaos, Aaron was shot several times on his front porch and died. But Jim had shot a deputy and somehow managed to escape once again. A month later, the outlaw was captured and jailed in Sneedville, and this time, that jailer didn't fall for any of Wright's preaching and made sure to keep those chain shackles nice and tight on old Jim, who was promptly convicted of murder and sentenced to life behind bars in the notorious Brushy Mountain Prison. Now, Brushy was known as the end of the line, and for good reason, since it had earned a well-earned reputation for breaking even the most hardened men. But just how long would Brushy be able to hold Jim Wright? Jim Wright had been locked away at Brushy Mountain Prison for 6 years, and he learned every aspect of how it operated. He knew every guard's tendencies, and more importantly, their potential weaknesses. And for their part, their biggest weakness came in 1897, when prison officials gave Jim a trustee position at the prison, which allowed him to start work on a chain gang, chopping weeds and picking up trash on public roads. Well, by now, you can probably guess what happened on Jim's very first day as working as a trustee. That's right, he promptly escaped again. The governor of Tennessee was furious and placed a $500 bounty, wanted dead or alive, on the escapee's head. But it didn't matter. Jim would remain on the run for the next 4 years. And during that time, nearly a dozen men, consisting of his family and his friends, joined him in his open defiance of the law. 2 of the men that were now riding with Wright were none other than Aaron Templeton's sons, who were seeking revenge on the sheriff for killing their father. And that opportunity came in July of 1901, when the gang caught up to the unsuspecting lawman. And just as Jim Wright was about to kill the cop, one of the Templeton boys spoke up. "Let me take care of this one, Uncle Jim." And with that, he reached in his pocket and pulled out 2 bullets that he had personally dug out of the front porch of his house. These were 2 of the bullets that had killed his father. He loaded them in his Colt revolver and pointed it at the sheriff. And then he spoke. "My pa asked me to give these back to you." And with that, he shot the lawman dead. The Wright and the Templeton gang hid in the most remote areas of the mountains, only emerging to gather supplies or to settle an old score. They began robbing stores and farms. They took anything they needed from anyone they wanted to. Wright even hunted down the man who had killed his father during the Civil War, shooting him in cold blood in the middle of the road as he walked to work one day. It seemed no one could stop him. And after the gang killed 2 more men and robbed a post office and a general store, officials in Gate City, Virginia, armed its citizens with 164 Winchester rifles and 1,000 cartridges to help defend themselves. The Wright and the Templeton gang were officially the most feared outlaws in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. By the fall of 1902, both governors of Tennessee and Virginia had placed bounties on the heads of all the members of the Wright and Templeton gang. They were literally the most wanted men in Appalachia. Several times, posses would organize and attack the gang in hopes of collecting that reward money. And each time, bloody battles ensued. But each time, Jim Wright would escape. Yet, in April of 1902, the Wright and Templeton gang's luck finally ran out in Gate City, Virginia. In one of the most explosive gun battles ever recorded, several posse members were killed and several members of the outlaw gang were as well. And when the smoke cleared, the leader of the Templetons was shot to death, and Jim Wright was found with no fewer than 15 bullet holes in his riddled body. The corpses of Wright and Templeton were taken to the courthouse in Virginia to collect that reward money. The law was so thrilled to finally have stopped these outlaws that they propped their bodies up on public display next to the courthouse for 2 days, where 3,000 people came to view the outlaws. In fact, so many people came that the law had to pay a guard 75 cents just to keep the bodies from being stolen. All told, the Wright and Templeton gang were responsible for at least 19 murders, but rumors suggest that the real number might be much higher. In the end, both Jim Wright and John Templeton both gave their lives to avenge the deaths of their own fathers. But once they started down the path of revenge, there was no turning back, and they left a trail of bloodshed in their wake no matter where they went. They literally were two of the most feared men in America. Yet today, 120 years later, their story has almost become lost to the hands of time. What about you, my friend? Do you think that they were right to seek revenge for their fathers? Or did they go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.